Hello, I'm Owen Carver, and this is Artificial Evidence, where we dive into the shadowy corners of history to uncover the truth, because the algorithm knows. Tonight's story takes us to the windswept coastline of Maine in the year 1929. It is a tale that begins with the discovery of a single object washed ashore and unravels into a chilling sequence of events that left an entire town haunted. The town of Harper's Bluff sat perched on the jagged cliffs overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Its lighthouse, a sentinel for passing ships, had guided sailors through the dense fog and perilous waters for over a century. But by 1929, the town's glory days were long behind it. The fishing industry had dried up, and most of the townsfolk had moved inland, leaving behind only the stubborn few who clung to the past. It all began on the morning of October 5th. A fisherman named Emery Haskins was combing the beach below the cliffs when he stumbled across an object half buried in the wet sand. It was an old leather suitcase, its once sturdy straps now brittle and cracked from the sea. When Emery opened it, he found something that made his blood run cold: a faded photograph of a woman, her face partially obscured by water stains, and a journal soaked through but still legible in places. The journal belonged to Margaret Hayes, a schoolteacher who had disappeared 2 years earlier. Margaret had arrived in Harper's Bluff in 1927 to take up a post at the local school. She was known for her kind demeanor and her love of the sea, often taking long walks along the cliffs. When she vanished one stormy night, leaving behind only a hastily abandoned room at the boarding house, the townsfolk assumed she had fallen victim to the treacherous terrain. But her body was never found, and rumors of foul play began to circulate. The discovery of Margaret's suitcase reignited those rumors. Sheriff Amos Trask, a grizzled man nearing retirement, reopened the investigation. His first step was to examine the journal. Though much of it was damaged, one passage stood out. Margaret had written about seeing strange lights on the water late at night and hearing voices in the fog, voices that seemed to call her name. As the sheriff dug deeper, he uncovered more unsettling details. Several locals reported seeing Margaret arguing with a man in the days leading up to her disappearance. That man was Henry Colson, the lighthouse keeper. Henry was a recluse who had lived at the lighthouse for over 30 years. He was known for his peculiar habits, such as talking to himself and keeping detailed logs of the ships that passed by. When questioned, Henry claimed he barely knew Margaret and had no idea why anyone would implicate him. But the sheriff was not convinced. Henry's logs for the night Margaret vanished were missing, and neighbors recalled seeing him hauling heavy sacks toward the cliffs during the storm. The case against Henry seemed to be building, but then came the first twist. A week after the suitcase was found, another body washed ashore. It was identified as Frank Marlowe, a traveling salesman who had stayed in town briefly around the time of Margaret's disappearance. His death was ruled accidental, a drowning caused by a shipwreck, but an autopsy revealed bruises consistent with a struggle. In his pocket was a crumpled note that read, simply, "She knew." This discovery turned the investigation on its head. Sheriff Trask now had two victims, both with ties to Margaret Hayes, but no clear answers. The townsfolk began to grow restless, and whispers of a curse spread. Some claimed the cliffs were haunted by the ghosts of sailors lost to the sea. Others believed Margaret's spirit was seeking revenge. The truth, however, was far more human and far more chilling. One night, Sheriff Trask received an anonymous tip directing him to the abandoned boathouse near the lighthouse. Inside, he found a hidden room containing a treasure trove of stolen goods, jewelry, silverware, and other valuables reported missing from nearby towns over the years. Among the items was a gold locket engraved with the initials MH. The evidence pointed to a smuggling ring operating out of Harper's Bluff, using the lighthouse as a signal post. Margaret, it seemed, had stumbled upon their operation and paid the ultimate price for it. But who was behind the ring? And why had Frank Marlowe been killed? The answer lay in the most unexpected place: Henry Colson's logs. Though the logs for the night of Margaret's disappearance were missing, others revealed a pattern of ships docking near the cliffs under the cover of fog. Henry had been complicit, using his position to aid the smugglers in exchange for a cut of their profits. But when Margaret discovered the operation, Henry panicked. He lured her to the cliffs during the storm and silenced her before she could expose him. Frank Marlowe, as it turned out, had been a member of the smuggling ring. After Margaret's death, he tried to blackmail Henry, threatening to go to the authorities unless he received a larger share of the profits. Henry, fearing exposure, killed Frank and staged his death as a drowning. Henry's confession, when it finally came, was devoid of remorse. He claimed he had no choice, that he was protecting himself and the town. But the townsfolk saw it differently. The lighthouse, once a symbol of safety, became a grim reminder of betrayal. Henry was sentenced to life in prison, and the smuggling ring was dismantled, but the scars left by his crimes lingered for generations. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Artificial Evidence. As always, the algorithm knows, and it led us to another tale of deception and darkness. If you enjoyed tonight's story, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.